In the early 20th century, beneath the blazing African sun, Kenya's Wanjohi Valley became a refuge for white settlers fleeing the constraints of their former lives. They were scandalous aristocrats, thrill-seekers, and romantics drawn to Kenya for freedom, indulgence, and reckless adventure. Among these, none were as notorious as Alice, Comtesse de Janzé. Her beauty captivated, her troubled soul haunted, and her fierce temper made even the most confident members of high society shiver. This was Happy Valley, where drugs, alcohol, and uninhibited passion flowed freely, creating a world of hedonism that was both seductive and destructive. Alice's life was marked by deep emotional wounds, inflicted by traumas she endured early on. These scars left her with an intense, almost desperate fear of abandonment. When her lovers attempted to leave, that fear would consume her, igniting violent outbursts that would leave lasting scars, not only on those she claimed to love, but on herself as well. Join us as we dive into the life, scandals, and tragic end of Alice de Janzé. Her story intertwines with the unsolved mystery of Lord Errol's murder, a tale of intrigue, passion, and betrayal that still captivates us and remains unsolved to this day. Alice de Janzé was born Alice Silverthorne in Buffalo, New York, on September 28, 1899, to millionaire William Silverthorne and his wife, Julia Bell Chapin. After 7 years of marriage, Alice arrived as the cherished, long-awaited child. Her parents lavished her with every comfort, vowing that their daughter would never want for anything. Her childhood was a picture of privilege. Governesses taught her French, German, and the arts of reading, writing, and arithmetic. On her 7th birthday, Alice was gifted her own pony, a testament to the indulgence that marked her early years. But beneath this glittering surface, trouble simmered between her parents. Julia Bell was born into two of Chicago's wealthiest families, the Chapins and the Armours, while William, though successful in the lumber trade, was seen as an outsider, of merchant-class origins, hardly a match for Chicago's elite. Julia Bell's family had urged her to marry someone from high society, but she married William against their wishes on January 8, 1892. After years of struggling to conceive, Alice's birth brought a brief renewal of happiness into their marriage. Yet by 1907, cracks began to deepen. William's long absences for work left Julia Bell lonely and suspicious, increasingly convinced of an affair between William and her cousin, Louise Maddox. Still, for Alice's sake, they united in their devotion to her, creating a cocoon of warmth and indulgence. But her world shattered on June 2, 1907, when her mother, Julia Bell, passed away from vascular laryngitis. At 7 years old, Alice lost the person she was closest to, as William's work often took him away. Though her mother left her an immense fortune and trust until her 18th birthday, it was little consolation for the child who suddenly felt adrift. Stricken, William compensated by pouring even more affection and luxury into Alice's life, taking her on a grand tour of Europe in hopes of filling the void left by her mother. His indulgence, though well-meaning, unknowingly set a dangerous standard in Alice's heart. She would come to expect the same unfaltering devotion from all the men in her life. Barely a year after Julia Bell's passing, William wed Louise Maddox on July 8, 1908, seemingly confirming Julia Bell's suspicions. Over the following years, Louise bore William 2 more children, Bill in May 1912 and Patricia in July 1915, yet Alice remained his favorite. Then, in 1913, an incident occurred between William and Alice, its details shrouded in secrecy but significant enough to prompt Julia Bell's family to act. Her brother, Uncle Sim, sought legal custody of Alice, arguing that she should become a ward of the court. The court ruled in his favor, and custody was transferred to Alice's aunt, Tatty. For Alice, already fragile from her mother's death, this separation from her father, the only stable figure left in her life, was a devastating blow. Though she remained in contact with William, their bond was forever altered, leaving an emotional void that would ripple through her life and relationships for years to come. Aunt Tatty did her best, but as a woman without children, she was unprepared for Alice's wild, willful nature. Alice had grown up with nearly boundless freedom under her father's indulgence, and she resisted the stricter household rules imposed by relatives she barely knew. Tatty, unable to manage Alice's spirited temperament, decided it would be best to send her to Mount Vernon Seminary, a prestigious girls' boarding school in Washington, D.C., where Alice would spend the next 4 years. It was during her time at the boarding school that Alice allegedly attempted suicide for the first time. It's likely that Alice was already battling cyclothymia, a form of bipolar disorder that would shadow her for the rest of her life. Following the suicide attempt, she was removed from school and brought back to Chicago to live with Aunt Tatty once again. By 17, Alice had become a striking beauty, her bobbed and waved hair lending her the allure of a silent film star, evoking the magnetic charm of Clara Bow or Louise Brooks. She quickly became a popular figure within Chicago's debutante circles, effortlessly charming those around her despite her inner struggles. After her coming out ball, she was officially part of Chicago high society, but her restless spirit soon grew weary of the rigid expectations and shallow parties that defined it. Drawn to excitement, Alice began exploring the darker, vibrant side of the jazz age. The roaring 20s pulsed through Chicago's speakeasies and smoky jazz clubs, and Alice, with her fearless, adventurous soul, was swept up in it. She became a regular in the city's nightclubs, dancing, drinking, and staying out until dawn. Rumors began to swirl about her involvement with a dashing Italian man reputed to have ties to organized crime. Alarmed by Alice's increasingly dangerous associations, her aunt and uncles intervened, fearing for her safety. They decided she should leave Chicago, hoping a change of scenery might provide a fresh start. And by 1920, just shy of her 21st birthday, Alice was on her way to Paris. In Paris, her keen eye for fashion soon landed her a position at a small but respected fashion house, where she quickly rose to become the head manageress. Paris offered Alice a carefree existence, mingling with artists, intellectuals, and socialites. But this fleeting taste of freedom would soon be interrupted by fate, for she was about to meet the man who would change the course of her life forever. Alice Silverthorne met Count Frederick de Janzé in a Parisian antique shop in May 1921. Frederick, sensitive and intellectual, was as handsome as he was charming. He had grown up in Paris and attended Cambridge University, where he studied English literature. At the onset of World War I, he left Cambridge to serve as an officer in the French Air Force. By 1917, he was appointed aide de camp to Maréchal Lyautey in Morocco, but after a bout of malaria, he was sent home to Paris to recover. With his mother Moya's encouragement, Frederick pursued Alice with devotion, and by the summer of 1921, they were engaged. The couple married on September 21, 1921, and soon set off on a tour of Morocco, sparking Alice's lifelong fascination with Africa. Upon their return to Paris, Alice discovered she was pregnant. While this news delighted Frederick and his family, Alice became withdrawn, isolating herself. Having lost her own mother so young, Alice likely harbored complicated feelings about motherhood, facing emotions she could barely understand, let alone express. On June 20, 1922, Alice gave birth to their first daughter, Nolwenn Louise Marie Alice. But within weeks, she resumed her social life, unable to find the maternal bond others expected of her. The dark moods that had haunted her since childhood crept back in. Frederick, though aware of Alice's emotional struggles, had hoped that motherhood might soothe her sadness. Instead, her distance from Nolwenn became a source of deep disappointment for him. When their second daughter, Paola Marie, was born on June 1, 1924, Alice once again slipped into a profound depression. Motherhood held no real allure for her. Rather, the weight of parental duties felt like a cage, deepening her sense of restlessness. Frederick, deeply concerned and desperate to revive her spirit, arranged for a journey to Kenya, hoping that Africa's wild beauty would rekindle her passion for life. Yet, he had no idea that this trip would do far more than lift her spirits. It would alter the course of their lives forever. Alice and Frederick were invited to Africa by their friends, Adina and Jocelyn Hay, the future Lord Errol. Alice and Frederick had met the Hays in Paris in 1923, and their scandalous reputation alone made them unforgettable. Idina had married her first husband, David Ewan Wallace, in 1913, and was known for her numerous affairs. She famously inspired the mother of the heroine in Nancy Mitford's The Pursuit of Love, a woman known for running off so often and with so many different people that she became known to her family and friends as the Bolter. Jocelyn met Idina while she was still married to her second husband, Charles Gordon. With his striking looks, golden blonde hair, and piercing blue eyes, Jocelyn was infamous as a charmer and womanizer who especially enjoyed seducing married women. Intelligent, attractive, and brimming with arrogance, Jocelyn Hay believed himself superior to others and was unafraid to show it. In 1924, Idina and Jocelyn's exploits became too scandalous for British society. Rather than tame themselves, they embraced exile, leaving for Kenya to settle in the idyllic Wanjohi Valley, a secluded paradise in the Kenyan highlands. The valley soon became a magnet for wealthy socialites seeking adventure and freedom, and Idina and Joss quickly became the most infamous of these settlers. Their home, called Slains, was the site of wild gatherings that embodied the couple's hedonistic ideals. It was rumored that, at Idina's urging, guests at her parties were expected to sleep with someone other than the person they had arrived with, fostering the debauchery that would earn the region its nickname, Happy Valley. This was the audacious world into which Alice and Frederick now entered. For Alice, Kenya was a revelation. The air was thick with freedom and possibilities, and the very landscape seemed to pulse with vitality. She became infatuated, not only with the country's raw beauty, but with the carefree, unrestrained lives of the Happy Valley set. And among them was Jocelyn, whose charisma proved impossible to resist. Their passionate affair ignited quickly, fueled by Joss's reputation as a lover and Alice's longing for an intensity she had never felt with Frederick. Frederick, ever devoted and eager for her happiness, concealed his hurt, choosing to overlook the affair in hopes that it would heal something within her. Meanwhile, Idina, heavily pregnant, seemed unfazed. She and Joss had always lived as they pleased, their open relationship a reflection of the unconventional world they thrived in. Alice and Frederick stayed in Kenya for 3 months, but as their departure loomed, Alice's heart grew heavy. She couldn't bear the thought of leaving behind the wildness and freedom she had found here, and the very notion of returning to the formalities of Paris filled her with dread. Persuasive and determined, she convinced Frederick to purchase land in the Wanjohi Valley, marking the start of a new chapter. By the end of 1925, the deal was sealed, and Alice was already dreaming of the life she would build in Kenya, a life marked by freedom, passion, and the tantalizing promise of adventure in the heart of Africa. Alice and Frederick returned to Paris in January 1926, shortly after Idina gave birth to a daughter. They reunited with their own daughters, Nolwenn and Paola, who had been staying with Aunt Taddy. The girls, now 3.5 and just under 2, had grown accustomed to life with their aunt, but were overjoyed to have their parents home. Yet this reunion would be brief. Only weeks after their arrival, they received a telegram from their lawyer announcing that the acquisition of the Wanjohi Valley Farm could be completed in Nairobi as soon as they returned to Kenya. By mid-February, they were on their way back. This second journey to Africa marked the beginning of Alice's gradual separation from her children. By March 1926, the de Janzés had signed the documents for their new property in the Wanjohi Valley, and Alice wasted no time in planning her dream house on the land. Kenya gave her a sense of liberation she had never known. She spent her days hosting parties, expanding her house designs, and filling her new home with a menagerie that included a baboon, a marmoset, a greyhound, and even a lion cub. Here in Kenya, Alice felt unburdened, free from the constraints of society, motherhood, and her duties as a countess. It was a world she could shape entirely to her desires, but this idyllic life would soon be upended by a new, magnetic addition to the Happy Valley set. Enter Raymond de Trafford, a 26-year-old English aristocrat. The youngest son of Sir Humphrey de Trafford, the 3rd Baronet, Raymond could trace his lineage back to the days of King Canute. Known for his charm and a reputation as a womanizer, Raymond had left a trail of broken hearts in his wake. Intrigued by Alice and Frederick's notorious presence in the valley, he arranged through a mutual friend, Geoffrey Buxton, to meet them in June 1926. Their first encounter was innocent enough, a casual meeting in Geoffrey's drawing room, but the connection between Alice and Raymond was instant, electric. Raymond, captivated, became determined to take things further. When Frederick left on safari the following week, Raymond seized his chance, persuading Alice to meet him secretly in Nairobi, and thus began another clandestine affair. In the early days, she continued her liaisons with Joss, but her focus soon shifted to Raymond, whose boldness and confidence reignited her desire for thrill and danger. While Joss had been a satisfying lover, neither he nor Alice had considered a serious future together or leaving their spouses. Raymond, however, was unattached and represented a potential escape from Alice's increasingly unhappy marriage. Frederick, sensing he was losing the woman he loved, remained dignified, even inviting Alice's new lover along on a 4-week safari. This decision, however, proved disastrous. With too much alcohol fueling underlying tensions, the men frequently clashed, avoiding a physical confrontation but sparring over literature and ideas instead. Exactly what transpired on the trip remains unclear, but whatever it was became unbearable for Alice, and she returned to the Wanjohi farm a week early. Confiding in Adina upon her return, she admitted she was contemplating divorce. Her plans for freedom, however, were delayed when Frederick fell ill with malaria and returned to the farm in poor health. It was decided that he should return to Paris to recover, and after some consideration, Alice agreed to accompany him. Yet even as she journeyed back with her husband, she felt more determined than ever to leave her marriage behind to be with Raymond. For his part, Raymond seemed unfazed by her departure, leaving Alice anxious but resolute. Upon arriving in Paris, Frederick reluctantly agreed to Alice's terms. They would remain friends, but their marriage was effectively over. Frederick would receive full custody of their daughters, Nolwenn and Paola, a decision Alice fully supported. She had a brief reunion with her children before, only a month after arriving in Paris, she returned to Kenya to be with Raymond. Back in Kenya, Alice and Raymond became an official couple, spending nearly every day of the last 3 months of 1926 together at the Wanjohi farm. Alice's attraction to Raymond quickly grew into an obsession, but Raymond, ever detached, maintained a cool distance in his emotions. He seemed incapable of caring for anyone as deeply as he did for himself, but Alice remained unwavering. Desperate to secure her future with him, she pressed her lawyers to accelerate her divorce from Frederick, fearing that Raymond's interest might fade. Ignoring his cautionary letters urging her to slow down, she began planning their wedding with reckless excitement. But Alice's dreams hit a harsh reality when Raymond informed his family of their intentions. The aristocratic de Traffords deemed Alice, an American and worse, a divorced countess, far beneath their social standing. Furthermore, as devout Catholics, they staunchly opposed Raymond's marriage to a divorcee. By the time Alice's lawyers managed to pursue grounds for an annulment, the damage was done, and her hopes for marriage were left in jeopardy. On March 25, 1927, Raymond visited Alice at her Paris apartment with devastating news. Their relationship was over. His parents had threatened to cut him off financially unless he severed all ties with her, and despite Alice's tearful pleas and assurances that her own wealth could support them both, Raymond remained unyielding. Heartbroken, Alice later visited Frederick and her daughters, sharing the news with her estranged husband. In a surprising act of compassion, Frederick comforted her, then, driven by a sense of loyalty, confronted Raymond, insisting he honor his promise and marry Alice. But Raymond was resolute. That evening, Raymond returned to Alice's apartment, and she begged him one last time to reconsider. She shifted from desperate pleas to anger, then to seduction, but nothing moved him. His mind was set, though he offered her the chance to meet for a final farewell lunch the next day. As he left, Alice could feel herself unraveling. Everything she had sacrificed, her marriage, her children, had been for a love that now lay shattered. Unable to sleep, she stewed in the bitter ache of betrayal, the weight of broken promises pressing down on her until a dark resolve took hold. Raymond would not leave her without facing the consequences. The next day, March 26, 1927, Alice met Raymond for lunch with an air of unsettling calm. She was cheerful, even laughing as they reminisced, concealing the turmoil simmering beneath. Raymond, oblivious to her inner storm, relaxed, believing they could part on good terms. After their meal, Alice suggested they do some shopping before his 4 o'clock departure, mentioning a quick errand at a nearby gun shop for Frederick. She intended to buy Raymond a parting gift. At the shop, Alice purchased a small .38 caliber Colt revolver with a pearl inlaid handle and a box of nickel-plated bullets. Calmly wrapping her purchase, she followed Raymond to the Gare du Nord, where the boat train to Bologna waited on platform 1. Walking through the bustling station, Alice held her composure. Once at the train, she told Raymond she needed to use the ladies' room and would meet him in his compartment to say a final goodbye. In the restroom, she unwrapped the revolver, loaded it, and tucked it into her handbag, steadying herself for what lay ahead. She found Raymond in his first-class compartment, stowing his luggage. He turned to her with a gentle smile, moving to kiss her goodbye. "Do you really want to leave?" she asked, her voice soft but intent. "Yes," he replied firmly. At the sound of the train whistle, Alice threw her arms around his neck, drawing him into one final kiss. In an instant, her hand slipped into her handbag, and she raised the revolver, pressing it to his chest. Before he could react, she pulled the trigger. Raymond crumpled. Without hesitation, Alice turned the gun on herself and fired. Witnesses later said they saw a faint smile on her lips as she fell to the floor. In that single tragic moment, Alice's desperation and passion culminated in an irrevocable act that would shock and haunt Paris and the world for years to come. Alice and Raymond were rushed to La Riboisière Hospital, just steps from the Gare du Nord, where surgeons fought to save them. Their injuries were severe, and neither was expected to survive the night. In a remarkable twist of fate, however, Raymond's surgery was successful. The bullet had miraculously missed his heart by only a few millimeters. Charges of attempted homicide were swiftly pressed against Alice, and she was formally indicted. After 6 weeks in the hospital, Alice was transferred to the medical ward of Saint-Lazare, an all-women's prison, where she faced constant interrogation. At first evasive, she eventually confessed in April, her words laced with haunting finality. "I was determined to die in his arms. When the whistle blew, I suddenly changed my mind and resolved to take him with me into the great beyond. Slowly, very slowly, I loosened my grasp around his neck, placed the revolver between our two bodies, and as the train started, fired twice, into his chest and into my own." Her attorneys fought tirelessly to secure her release, and eventually, Alice was allowed to leave on the condition that she recover in seclusion until fit for trial. Despite the scandal, Frederick remained her steadfast supporter, insisting she recover at his country estate, the Château de Parfondeval. While in convalescence, Alice exchanged letters with Raymond, who, despite the physical pain and public disgrace, was not ready to cut her out of his life. In a surprising declaration to the New York Times on May 19, 1927, he announced his intentions to reconcile with her. Months later, with both Alice and Raymond physically recovered, the date of her indictment was set. On December 23, 1927, 9 months after that fateful afternoon at the Gare du Nord, Alice faced the court, officially charged with wounding and causing bodily harm to Raymond de Trafford. Under questioning, she reiterated her confession. Her original plan had been to end her own life, but in a moment of rage and heartbreak, she had chosen to take Raymond with her. Raymond's testimony, given with an unsettling coldness, revealed a hazy memory of the event. "I am responsible," he stated flatly. "I had asked Madame de Janzé to become my wife. She wanted to, but my family didn't want her." He recalled only fragments. "Madame de Janzé approached me and asked if I really wanted to leave. I replied yes. Then I saw the revolver in her hand. I seized it at the handle. She had already fired." Alice's defense attorneys passionately argued her case, painting Raymond as the true catalyst for her actions. They portrayed Alice as a devoted wife and mother who had been led astray, arguing that this was nothing more than a crime of passion. Finally, the judge rendered his decision. Alice would serve 6 months, but with a suspended sentence, allowing her to walk free on probation. She was fined a symbolic fee of 100 francs and later fully pardoned by President Gaston Doumergue. The ink was barely dry on her release papers when Alice began planning her return to Kenya. Alice arrived in Mombasa in January 1928, taking the train to Nairobi with a mixture of excitement and unease. Much had changed in Wanjohi since her last visit. The once infamous couple Joss and Adina were now on the brink of divorce. Adina had taken a lover, a striking rancher named Boy Long, while Joss had begun an affair with Mary Ramsey Hill and was preparing to announce their engagement. Yet this didn't prevent him from rekindling his affair with Alice, a pattern of separations and passionate reunions that would continue between them for nearly 2 decades. Despite the scandal surrounding her, Alice was mostly welcomed back with open arms. In fact, her notoriety from the shooting had only added to her mystique in Happy Valley circles. Many saw Raymond as someone who had deserved his fate, an outsider who never truly belonged. But not everyone saw Alice as a heroine. She soon learned she had made a powerful enemy in Lady Joan Grigg, the governor's wife and a self-appointed moral authority. Lady Grigg, incensed by Alice's behavior and reputation, argued that she was a dangerous and destabilizing force, especially as a recent divorcee amidst families in the colony. With her husband's influence, Lady Grigg succeeded in having Alice legally barred from Kenya. Her passport was revoked, marked with the words, "Prohibited Immigrant," and she was given 28 days to arrange her departure. In April 1928, Alice returned to France. Inspired by her friend Paula Gallibrand, she invested in the Paris fashion world, acquiring a stake in Jean Patou's renowned salon. Yet even the glamour of this new venture couldn't keep her mind off Raymond. Their connection endured. They corresponded often, and she visited him frequently in England. With her marriage to Frederick officially annulled by Pope Pius XI in August 1928, nothing now stood in the way of their union. If she could persuade Raymond to marry her, she could even regain entry to Kenya. Determined, Alice orchestrated a trip to the south of France, where Raymond indulged in his love of gambling, hoping to win him over at last. Meanwhile, marriage fever swept through her old Happy Valley circle. Joss, now Lord Errol, finalized his divorce from Idina and married Mary Ramsay Hill on February 8, 1930. Idina, not to be outdone, married her fourth husband, Donald Haldeman, that November. Even Frederick found new happiness, marrying Genevieve Ryan on January 9, 1930. These weddings only fueled Alice's resolve. After 4 relentless years of pursuit, Alice's campaign finally bore fruit. On February 22, 1932, she and Raymond married, marking the long-awaited beginning of a new chapter in her tumultuous life. Rather than a traditional white gown, Alice wore a striking black and white dress, her loyal bulldog, Jimmy, at her side throughout the ceremony. News of the wedding spread quickly, with the New York Times headline on February 23 reading, "American Woman Weds Man She Shot." Although Alice was overjoyed to finally marry the man she had pursued for 5 long years, her friends and family remained baffled by her attraction. Even Raymond's friends struggled to praise him, describing him as a hothead with a quick temper. Yet Alice seemed unfazed, continuing to overlook Raymond's drinking, gambling, and unpredictable nature. Their honeymoon in Monte Carlo and Cannes was far from idyllic. Raymond's gambling quickly got out of hand, and he began to drain Alice's wealth at the gaming tables, leaving her distressed and disillusioned. This marked the beginning of many bitter quarrels, with one recurring point of contention: Kenya. Alice longed to return, while Raymond was fiercely opposed, determined to live independently and not under his wife's influence. Each time Alice mentioned Kenya, Raymond grew colder and more resentful. In an attempt to ease the strain, Alice took a brief solo trip to Slovakia for the healing waters, rejoining Raymond in Paris shortly after. But the reunion quickly turned sour. Witnesses reported a heated argument, culminating in Raymond hurling his champagne brandy cocktail into Alice's face. Calmly, Alice reached into her handbag for her compact, but Raymond, panicked, thought she was reaching for a gun. Without a second thought, he fled, disappearing down the street. Alice, her patience finally exhausted, wasted no time in contacting her lawyers. She demanded an immediate legal separation and paid for Raymond's first-class passage to Australia, promising to fund him while he was there. Just months after their highly publicized wedding, Alice found herself alone once again, left with little more than the remnants of a broken dream. Though once again facing divorce, Alice's determination to return to Kenya remained unwavering. A new governor, Sir Joseph Byrne, had replaced Edward Grigg, freeing Alice from the threat of opposition. Upon arrival, she went directly to Sir Joseph, presenting letters of support, including one from Frederick de Janzé himself. Impressed, the governor granted her the right to stay. It was 1933, and after 5 long years, Alice had finally returned to Wanjohi Valley. In the past, she would always stay with Joss and Idina upon her arrival. But everything had changed. Joss and Idina were now divorced, and their infamous house, Slains, had been sold in the split. Idina welcomed Alice to her new home, Clouds, while Joss had moved into Osarian Palace, which he'd gained through his new wife Mary's divorce settlement. Joss, meanwhile, was embarking on a different life. Recently appointed to the Naiva Shah District Council, he now had duties and responsibilities, speeches and meetings that left him little time for his old escapades with Alice. In early 1934, Alice received devastating news. Frederick had died suddenly in Baltimore of a septic infection complicated by meningitis. There is little record of Alice's reaction, but given the youth of their daughters, Nolwenn, now 11, and Paola, 9, one can imagine the loss may have stirred painful memories of her own mother's passing. The girls were sent to live with Aunt Taddie, and while Alice kept her distance, she didn't abandon them. She visited frequently, corresponding with them through letters to maintain a bond from afar. Yet, the fragile peace Alice had found in Kenya was soon shattered. By 1938, war in Europe loomed, the threat palpable even in Kenya's highlands. Shortly after Alice's last visit with her daughters in September 1939, war was officially declared and World War II began. Just a month into the conflict, Lord Erroll's second wife, Mary, passed away from kidney failure. Alice did not attend the funeral. Joss was now a widower, and with Alice's divorce from Raymond finalized in October 1937, they could have rekindled their romance. She confessed to her neighbor, Pat Fisher, that she hoped to reunite with him. But the reunion never happened. Alice's mental health, already fragile, worsened. Her bipolar disorder grew more severe as she aged. Mood swings became extreme, and her depressive episodes lingered painfully. The Highlands, once a sanctuary, no longer held the same calming power. Her suffering was compounded by severe stomach pains, a constant reminder of the bullet wound from her attempt at Gare du Nord. Despite multiple surgeries, the pain never fully abated, casting a relentless shadow over her life. This marked the beginning of Alice's slow and tragic decline, as the vitality that had once fueled her adventures gradually dimmed. Alice's depressive moods worsened with the arrival of a newcomer to Wanjohi Valley, the strikingly beautiful Lady Diana Delves Broughton, formerly Diana Caldwell. From the moment they met in November 1940, Alice disliked the young woman. Diana, the mistress of Sir Henry Delves Broughton, known as Jock, for 5 years, had married him immediately following his divorce from his first wife, Vera Edith Griffith. Yet, it was a marriage of convenience, not love. At just 27, Diana was 30 years younger than her new husband and made no secret of her intent to pursue other men. Shortly after arriving in Nairobi, Diana declared herself available, leaving a string of admirers in her wake. One man Alice was interested in, Richard Pembroke, seemed briefly infatuated with Diana, who rejected him, calling him dull. While Richard returned to Alice, it stung to be overshadowed by a younger, captivating beauty. The rivalry between Alice and Diana intensified when Diana began a passionate public affair with Lord Erroll. Though Jock openly tolerated his wife's indiscretions, by early 1941 he became increasingly disturbed, particularly after receiving an anonymous taunt. "There is no fool like an old fool. What are you going to do about it?" In mid-January, Jock confronted Diana and demanded to know her true feelings for Joss. Unflinchingly, Diana admitted she was in love with him, saying, "It's something I cannot help." Hoping to salvage their marriage, Jock suggested a getaway to distance themselves from Joss, but Diana refused. Determined, Jock went directly to Joss, revealing Diana's confession. Joss, equally honest, admitted his own deep feelings for her. Jock proposed a plan. He and Diana would leave Kenya for a few months to give their marriage a chance, and if she still wished to be with Joss upon their return, he'd step aside. But when Joss pointed out Diana's likely refusal, Jock made a final, desperate request that Joss leave Kenya. Joss declined. There was a war to fight, and he was needed in Kenya. Resigned to the inevitable, Jock instructed his lawyers to begin divorce proceedings. On January 23rd, over lunch, Jock informed Diana of his decision. That evening, an unusual celebration was held at the Muthaiga Club. Upon arrival, Jock found Diana and Joss entwined on a couch, openly displaying their affection. As the evening progressed, Jock raised a toast, masking his bitterness with forced cheer. "To Diana and Joss, I want to wish them every happiness in the future, and may their union be blessed with an heir." Beneath the words, one could sense the lingering pain of a man who had lost everything. Later, Diana and Joss left to dance at the Claremont nightclub, with Jock requesting that Diana return by 3 a.m. After they departed, Jock stayed at the bar with his friend June Carberry, drinking heavily. "We've only been married 3 months, he lamented to her, "and look how it is for me now." June later recalled that by the time Jock left the bar around 1:30 a.m., he was nearly collapsing from intoxication. Jock and June arrived back at the Delves Broughton residence. About 15 minutes after Jock bid June goodnight, Diana and Joss pulled into the driveway. Before Joss sped off into the night, Diana cautioned him to drive safely, unaware that this was the last time she would ever see him alive. In the early hours of the morning, Joss drove towards his Muthaiga bungalow. As he neared the intersection of the Ngong-Nairobi Road, he inexplicably stopped his car short of the crossroads. In the silence, 2 gunshots shattered the night. One bullet missed, but the other struck him beneath his left ear, killing him instantly. His lifeless body was shoved under the dashboard, and the car was pushed off the road as his killer disappeared into the dark. At 8:15 a.m., an ambulance arrived, and Joss's body was carefully removed and examined. It wasn't long before someone recognized him as Jocelyn Hay, Lord Errol. News of Joss's death rippled through Wanjohi Valley, hitting Diana hardest of all. Overcome with grief, she went to Joss's bungalow, collecting a few keepsakes, a pair of his pajamas, among other mementos, to remember him by. Idina, his former wife, also made her way to the bungalow, searching for the Errol family pearls, with plans to pass them on to their daughter. Yet, of all the reactions, Alice's was the strangest. Upon hearing the news, she requested to be taken to the mortuary to see his body. Allowed to enter, she gazed at Joss's lifeless form on the cold mortuary slab, the man with whom she'd shared 2 turbulent decades of passion and distance. Leaning down, she kissed him one last time and whispered, "Now you are mine forever." Initially, reports circulated that Joss had died in a car accident, but soon the truth emerged. He had been murdered. Investigators began focusing on potential suspects, each with their own dark ties to Joss. The most obvious was Jock Delvis Broughton, the humiliated husband whose marriage to Diana was unraveling due to her affair with Joss. Yet Jock was not the only wronged man with a motive. Joss had also been involved with Phyllis Filmer, and her husband Percy was another suspect. Even Diana, despite her visible devastation, came under scrutiny, and Alice, with her own infamous history, was briefly considered. But by early March, the investigators were certain they had their man. On March 14, 1941, Jock Delvis Broughton was arrested, thrusting the scandal further into the public eye and leaving the valley reeling with suspicion and grief. The trial of Jock Delvis Broughton began on May 26, 1941, lasting 27 tense days. Jock was defended with remarkable skill by Harry Morris, the renowned South African barrister. The prosecution's case, thin and circumstantial, relied more on emotion than evidence. Their argument hinged on 2 guns stolen from Jock's home, suggesting one of these might have been the murder weapon, yet the bullets recovered from Joss's body and the crime scene did not match. However, bullets from a shooting range Jock had visited did match those used in the murder, casting a shadow of doubt. On July 1, 1941, the jury reached its decision. Jock Delvis Broughton was found not guilty in the murder of Lord Errol. Throughout the trial's scandal and public scrutiny, Diana stayed by Jock's side, offering unwavering support. But even acquitted, Jock remained a pariah in Kenya, never regaining his former status or acceptance within society. With his reputation irreparably damaged, Jock took a fatal dose of morphine, ending his life on December 5, 1942. Alice spent every possible moment with her lover, Richard Pembroke. She was consumed by the details of Jock's trial, but Richard, uncomfortable with the spotlight and reluctantly testifying on her behalf, found the attention unbearable. The weight of his association with Alice and the scandal surrounding her became too much. Desperate for escape, he requested a transfer to London headquarters. Midway through the trial, his request was approved, and on July 24th, he departed for Cairo. Although they continued to correspond, his absence left Alice desolate. Her health deteriorated and her spirits darkened. In early September 1941, Alice underwent a hysterectomy, dreading the painful recovery that lay ahead. Her thoughts grew increasingly bleak, fixating on death. In this state, she made the painful decision to put down her beloved dachshund, Minnie. Rather than taking her to a veterinarian, she administered a fatal dose of Nembutal herself. In a chilling letter to Richard, she explained her choice, describing Minnie's escalating terror of car rides. "I feel as though I have just committed a murder," she wrote. Recalling Richard's past advice that life must go on, she replied bitterly, "In Joss's case, someone decided that. In Minnie's case, I did. The length of our own lives lies entirely within our hands, unless someone else gets at us first." On September 15, 1941, Alice joined friends Patsy and Noreen Pearson for lunch, afterward making a solitary visit to St. Paul's Church in Kiambu, where her former lover Jocelyn Hay, Lord Errol, was buried. Although she had visited his grave before, this would be her last farewell. On the morning of September 30th, 1941, Alice composed 5 letters. 2 were for her daughters, 1 a suicide note, 1 addressed to the police, and the last to Richard, whom she had loved but knew might never understand her choice. She locked her bedroom door, wrapped a bandage around her chest, and donned her finest nightgown. Alice de Trafford, once Comtesse de Janzé, took her own life on September 30th, 1941. Her 2 daughters, aged 19 and 17, read the news in a Chicago newspaper while living with Aunt Tatty. Unable to manage Alice's estate in Kenya, it was left to an orphan child. Eventually, Wanjohi Farm passed into government hands. Alice was laid to rest in an unmarked grave beside a river on her beloved farm, near where her beloved dog Minnie had been buried, marking the quiet, lonely end of her tumultuous life. An argument can certainly be made that Alice was the one who murdered Lord Errol. During Jock Delves Broughton's trial, murmurs hinted that the murderer was a cast-off lover exacting revenge. Alice, after all, had already tried to kill a man who dared to leave her, and her unpredictable nature was an open secret. Years later, Alice Boyle, the daughter of Alice's trusted doctor, claimed her mother had seen a confession letter in which Alice admitted to Lord Errol's murder. According to Boyle, the letter was quietly submitted to the coroner, only to vanish without a trace. Alice's behavior following Joss's death was hauntingly strange, even for her. When she visited his body in the mortuary, she bent over him, kissed his lips, and whispered, "Now you are mine forever." Days before her own death, she confided to her friend Patsy Bowles, "If you have an obsession or a very deep wish, or even 2 wishes that you dream about and want, they often happen. The first of my wishes has happened. I wonder if the second one will occur." Author Paul Spicer in The Temptress, The Scandalous Life of Alice de Janz, suggests that Alice's first wish was to kill Lord Errol, and her second was to join him in death, bound together at last. Whether we believe that Alice, Jock, or another wronged lover took Jocelyn Hay's life, the mystery remains unsolved. The truth eludes us, slipping into shadows with the legends of Wanjohi Valley. All that remains are fragmented stories, rumors echoing beneath the African sun, and memories of a glittering, haunted era, the ghosts of Happy Valley drifting eternally through a land that still remembers them well. So, what are your thoughts on the scandalous life of Alice de Janz? And who do you believe was truly behind the murder of Lord Errol? I'd love to hear your theories. Please leave a comment sharing your thoughts on this enduring mystery. And as always, thank you for watching.